Yay! It is Monday, January 11th, and we are tuning into Monday night where Red is our special speaker of the hour. But before that, I want to introduce our newest member, Percy Kennedy. So Percy, go ahead and tell us all about you and about your book.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and a whole lot about the book.
Yay, I love it.
For having me on. My name is Percy Kennedy, and I have a nonprofit that's titled Voices of the Fatherless, which is also the title of the book. And I have been working in the prison ministry since 2016 regarding a mentoring program for incarcerated dads. The whole focus is to help these fathers stay connected with their children while they're incarcerated. Therefore, they can have a connection and reduce the recidivism rate that often occurs once men are released. But also, too, the other aspect is to reduce the likelihood of incarceration of their children, because children of incarcerated parents are about 7 times the greater risk of incarceration. We have multiple stories, men who come to realization that they're following in the footsteps of their father, their grandfather, and in the path of incarceration. I've never been in prison myself. I ended up doing this, being involved in this project through a mentoring program for fatherless children, and just was given an opportunity to partner with a lady at our church who was mentoring guys in the discipleship program at the Wallace Pack unit. And then just kind of asked me to participate in that through research and just finding out more about the need, and just saw that how fatherlessness and incarceration go hand in hand. About 80% of incarcerated men grow up from fatherless families. So there's definitely was a need there and a connection. I grew up with my dad and mom at home, and both parents. However, my sophomore year in college, I became a single parent, had full custody of a 5-month-old through some circumstances, and I really saw, firsthand the need for both parents, and also connected with the whole single parent family aspect of it. And then just had opportunities once my son was older, have all this free time, and began to just see in my own community, but there's in the Houston area, the number of fatherless kids, and it's a huge number. I live in Spring, which is near the Woodlands, and about 47% of the homes in Spring don't have fathers in them. And so it's definitely an epidemic, and definitely was a need. How we got to the book was really working with the guys in the prison and seeing that they came to understand the impact fatherlessness has had in their own life, but they wanted to ensure that that didn't happen to their own kids. And so going through this journey, part of it is that we teach them and encourage them to communicate with their children through writing. And the words of wisdom and insight that they were sharing with their kids began to become relevant not only to their own kids, but also children that were not their own. We're taking the letters to a school in Houston that we're mentoring 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. And these kids actually wanted to read the letters themselves. It was like, we brought the letters that these guys wrote saying, hey, you don't want to do this. You don't want to follow these footsteps. And there were certain things in the letters that was resounding and throughout the letters: the importance of education, respect for authority, your friendship matters, the importance of faith, how to express your emotions in a healthy way. And so this is where the Voices of the Fatherless book was birthed. Book is a collection of letters from incarcerated men we want to use to inspire youth to not follow in their footsteps, but also to bring awareness to the issue of fatherlessness, and even to be a book that someone would want to use to mentor mentor a child who has a father in prison, or mentor a child that's fatherless, and use this as a resource to inspire not only the mentors to get involved, but also to have an opportunity for kids to see they don't have to follow in that footsteps, to learn from other men that have been in that situation. We have about 20 of the guys who were in our program starting in 2016 that are home now. So the plan is to have them actively engaged in reaching youth, going into schools, and not only sharing the book, but here's the person that actually wrote the letter that's in the book, and to be able to share their own personal story. So looking forward to being part of this group, and thanks for having me.
Oh, of course, Percy, we are so excited for you to join us, and I'm so excited about your book, and it's a wonderful nonprofit, so you guys should check it out in your free time. It's something very dear to Percy, and it's very dear, I feel like, to a lot of people. And so just take the time to kind of check it out. But thank you so much for joining us. And so Red, man of the hour, it is all you.
Well, thank you so very much for inviting me to do this tonight. We started out in one direction and turned at the end, and we're ready. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Anyway, sort of my journey in writing, but in writing in general and trying to give some information back and forth, I figured I just kind of go down my path a little bit and then exit when it's appropriate. But basically, we do things we enjoy much more than we do things that we don't enjoy. Probably back in school, I didn't enjoy writing. That was one of those things you had to do. And most of the writing at that time was a whatever it was a what. And never really got into how-tos or whys. It was all what. But then as things started to change, I get 5 different college degrees, all in different subjects. And writing in some of those areas were almost routine every single week. It just sort of changed. But that was almost all in the what. As I changed over into the military, it became a little bit more of the how-to. And probably, I'm gonna say easily thousands of documents I've written between academia, military, and business. But as I go through and I start documenting how-to, you got to understand what's happening. And that becomes, you have to ask the right questions. You have to be able to put something down that somebody who's never seen it before can follow the yellow brick road and do that. And so that literally hundreds and thousands of documents I've written over time. Now, one of the more interesting ones happened to be on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I was the head of logistics for that particular organization out of New Orleans. And I wrote a couple papers into an international journal. I got invited to speak. So I had to have the presentation and everything else. So that was a case where now all of a sudden in the military, I was speaking all the time, but in business, I wasn't. But this was an opportunity that I went to the conference. I spoke, I think 800 people or something like that was probably the audience I had at that time. And then as I continued on, I went back into the military. I did 4.5 years on active duty with an invitation to Vietnam, 20 years in the reserves. I went back on active duty, got an invitation to Bosnia at the end. But I was in Germany in Stuttgart. And as such, I had oversight responsibility for 5,500 reservists in 89 countries in Europe and Africa. And one of the places that we did a lot of business with was a NATO school in Oberammergau, Germany. And I got invited to speak there. And I had to send my speech in so that the translators, when the NATO people showed up, they could translate it into French or German or whatever, just make it easier. And they said, pretty much try to stay to the topic. You can diverge a little bit, but anyway. So that kind of got me more into the speaking end of things. All of a sudden, I'm in late bloom, military's over, I'm working for Halliburton, and they sort of decide that I'm old enough to retire, whether I thought so or not, it didn't matter. They said, you're retired. But fortunately, they did give me a good deal. That's one of those things you couldn't argue with. But as such, I got involved with self-improvement, personal growth, motivation, and I found a mentor. I was doing a lot of reading, and one of the things that he says, you read 3 books on a subject, you can be literally called an expert, right? You read 5 books on a subject, and you can author your own book. So I wrote a couple books. Failure is not an option, and no matter what, you can do it. And I was speaking at his events around the country, and at the end of my speaking, I would sell my books and my CDs in the back of the room. And so that kind of worked out pretty nicely, and I stayed in that self-improvement field for quite a long time. And one of the things I noticed that in business, the business wants you to improve to be a better supervisor, a better budgeter, a better whatever, but it was never a better person. Now, all of a sudden, I'm finding out that I can be a better person that I never really thought about. And I read, I'm going to say probably a book a week for about almost 4 years on some aspect of motivation, self-improvement. And that's what I wrote my books on until about 2013, 14 timeframe. My wife had a lump in her breast, and some days she could find it, and some days we couldn't. And then 2014 came around, and it was finally there. Hey, we can feel it more than 2 or 3 times in a row, so we probably ought to get something done. And we've been doing a lot of preventive stuff, thinking, well, maybe if it is, we can slow it down. Regardless, she went and had a biopsy, had breast cancer, stage 2. Went in, had it removed because it had gone into 2 lymph nodes. They had to do chemo, had to do radiation. Anyway, in the process of this, all of a sudden being a caregiver, I had to transition, and I started reading about, well, how do you tackle this side effect? How do you tackle that one? And my first love was chemistry. I'll tell everybody that. I ask that question to a lot of audiences. What was your first love? My first love was chemistry, sophomore in high school, long before I ever met my wife. And I never had a chance to practice it because I got an invitation to Vietnam once I got my degree in chemistry. But nowadays I use that degree to go research what goes on in the human body at the cellular level, chemically speaking. I look for cause and effect relationships. Treat a cause, you fix a problem. Treat a symptom, you always treat it. So I started looking at, well, what's causing these things to happen? I'm going in, I'm looking at the side effects of different kinds of prescription, chemo, and things like that. And so all of a sudden, my passion was ignited. I said, this is a whole lot more fun than writing about self-improvement. And in the process of doing that, I wrote a book on weight loss, looking at the chemical reactions of what causes fat to go into a fat cell, what causes it to come out, what causes fat to burn, what stops fat from burning. But then all of a sudden, as I'm doing more reading, more research, I think, I kind of like the topic of longevity more than anything else. And so I started writing on that. I wrote a couple of books on that one. But through my wife's chemo, radiation, surgery, and all that rest of that stuff, the only real symptom or side effect that I couldn't cure was fatigue. No matter what I did, she was taking 1 or 2 2-hour naps a day. Well, I found a book. We decided, okay, on day 1 of radiation, we're going to try this process and see what happens. I said, if this woman can cure years of being in a wheelchair with multiple sclerosis, what's going to hurt us trying it ourselves? So we did. 48 hours later, she's never had another nap, literally. On the last day of radiation, we left Houston, Texas, drove to Jacksonville, Florida, 1,000 miles. 48 hours later, we're heading back. I have a U-Haul. She's right behind me in a car, 500 miles by herself each day. No problems. And this is after months of chemo and weeks of radiation. And that's one of those things that I was able to glean out of a book. What is really going on? And one of the last jobs I had at Halliburton before they asked me to go home and enjoy life was a program called Taproot. I don't know if anybody ever has heard of it, probably not. But basically it deals with going down 7 levels of why did this happen? Well, if that happened, why did that happen? Why did that? And you go down until you can't find any more whys. And that's kind of what really hooked me into this, what's going on in the human body. If I know that calcium needs to go from here to here to here to here, well, what helps it and what stops it in order to get to your bones? And that's what I do. That's where I'm at now. But as I started going through there, I started noticing my reading change. And if we're writers, we ought to be writing all the time. If we're authors, we ought to be writing books. But in the process of reading, all of a sudden I noticed a shift. I went from what to how to why in my writing, but I noticed my shift in my reading. Now I'm looking at, well, how did that, let me go back and reread that again. How did that character get introduced? What did they say about him? How did they end the chapter that cooked me on the next one? So I'm looking at paragraph length. I'm looking at choices of words. I'm looking at a lot of things that I never looked at before. And sometimes I go back and read something again, and I look at the actual structure of what they were writing. Now, I have written one novel, but it's a different type of novel. I have the whole story written except for the characters. And that was on one of those NaNoWriMos when my wife was going through some issues with chemo. I took 30 days and I wrote 60,000 words or whatever it was. But I still need to go back and put in the character dialogue. But as we're going through there, I'm noticing that there's a lot of different kinds of ways of saying the same thing. And that same thing applies now as we're writing books. One of the ways that people write books is they just sit down, they have this thought in their mind, boom, 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 and they find out that they have months of editing, months of just rewrites and everything else. And it takes a long time to get it done. Then you have other people who give the same presentation over and over again to audiences. And they record it and they sit down and they try writing it. And they still have maybe months of editing, but a fair amount. And then I started thinking about that. How is the easiest, based on my how and why to and everything else, what's the easiest way to write a book? And to me, if Kathy Horizon and I were writing a book and I was saying, Kathy, if you were able to answer 20 questions in an interview one-on-one and you knew the answers to them immediately, in other words, I'd say, what's the first car you ever had? Boom, you know the answer. If I said, what are 4 or 5 things about that car you really liked? And what was the next car? But there are things in our lives, whatever passions we have, that we can write about very, very easily. But if we start out, and I tell new authors that I work with, if you want to adopt this, it's going to save you a lot of time. Don't have to, but I said, it works. But figure out 40 questions that you need answered, that your audience must have the answers to. Then take the best 20. The other 20 may become a second book, may not, doesn't matter. But pick those best 20. And if you end up sitting down eyeball to eyeball and taking a phone and recording that session, Amy asks me a question, I give an answer. She has the same list of questions. She has my bullets. She knows the order I'm going to go in. And at the same time, the story, it's a story, is being told. And sometimes with little testimonials, sometimes little vignettes, but the story is getting told. And then all of a sudden, a couple hours later, you're done. The book is done, literally. You send it off to a place like rev.com. They type it up. Human listens to your voice. 24 hours later, you have a manuscript back on your hand. But it takes almost no editing. So if you're looking at being an author, that's a process that can work very, very easily for certain types of books. Novels, no. But how-to books, yes. For a lot of retirees for their memoirs.
You froze on us, Red.
I was gonna say, is he only frozen on my end or on everybody's?
No,
end?
no, no.
Everybody?
No, he's frozen.
Yeah, he'll come back.
Okay.
It would work for tabletop role-playing games too. This concept here. I'm
Yeah.
curious to give it a. I'm curious to give it a try.
Yeah, I was thinking more for someone like, me. So I have, my 2 little kids and I'm finding hard times
There he
to
is.
kind of do it.
Back again, what happened?
You cut out. I don't know. You like left us at a cliffhanger and
We
you're
all
just like, I'm
froze.
gonna
You were
freeze.
still going.
Yeah, time-wise for the kid thing for sure. Amy.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing.
But that to me, I find is the easiest way to eliminate editing or really minimize editing. But as I said, I was making a commitment. I made that commitment January 1st of last year. I said, I'm writing every day. I write every day anyway. There was a group in 500 words in Facebook. We started writing for 31 days. We're going to write 500 words each. And that was about 2014. Kathy, are you in that one? I'm not sure if you are. My
You're on
500,
mute, Kathy.
my 500 words. Anyway, are you in that group?
No.
Okay. But several of us, we started out in my 500 words. And for me, that's about 7, maybe 8 minutes. It's pretty easy to do. I type 80, 90 words a minute usually. That's why it's so easy for me to take a thought and just flip it out the end of my fingers. It just comes out. But I started that and I made a commitment, made 31 days, and we made 100 days, and we made 6 months, then we made a year. Anyway, I haven't missed a day since January 1st of 2014, writing every single day. I finally did for quite a few months, 1,300 words is my minimum, because that was a bit of a challenge. But I enjoy it. But now as I'm starting to look at things, what am I doing? My focus has gone from self-improvement to health and wellness, but I want to keep it current. So I look at health and wellness headlines every day. If there's something there that catches my passion, I write about it. If not, I now reverted back into my longevity end of things. I wrote over 170 articles on COVID, not one of my favorite subjects, but I was finding there just wasn't enough information being put out. And so I dive in. I love statistics. One of my favorite subjects. I took it as an elective in college. And then I was working on a PhD, and I went and talked to the stat professor and had 9 hours of stat weight in 20 minutes. I felt really good about that. But anyway, when you're starting to look at how do we as writers help ourselves help others? So as I'm changing my daily stuff from being just informative, I want to help other people. Well, another way of doing that is the author groups. This group we have right here is a perfect example. But I'm also involved with posting on LinkedIn, posting in various parts of Facebook. I started 2 years ago, 1,500 connections on LinkedIn. And I said, I'm going to start concentrating on authors and books and proofreaders and publishers and whatever. And January 3rd, I hit 15,000. But it's been all focused in that area. Now I'm involved in something else that is going to be peripheral to that. So I'm probably going to tweak a little bit, but still keep half of it in the book writing, publishing end of things. My NFAA, Nonfiction Authors Association, is a way of doing that. Houston Independent Authors, and others, a couple others that I've been in and out of. conferences. I've been to several of those as writers. But if we're going to be writers, we need to be able to collaborate with other people. We're doing a perfect example here with this group. We have experts come in, we ask questions, we go back and forth, we do one-on-ones with people. But those are the things I think that really help us as we go through. And as I'm talking to new people that want to write a book, or okay, say James, I know has written several, but James was a guy who wanted to write a book. You know, I'm sitting there saying, I've kind of evolved into a book coach, even though it wasn't intended. But I'm starting to say, okay, James, who's your audience? Who are you writing to? You know, if you don't know your audience, it's kind of hard to say, well, I don't know. But I think that's one of the clarity things you need up front as a writer, as an author. But you also need to know what your purpose is. If it's a memoir, you're going to write, you know, about your 70 years or whatever, and all you're going to do is buy 20 books and give them out to family, you don't care. But if your ambition is to be a public speaker, then you know maybe that's one of those things you sell at the back of the room. But if you want to make a bestseller, an award-winning book, then you really and truly do need some kind of program. So how do you go about incorporating that? Your purpose has to be known at the front, so that as you're writing, you need to be able to do that. Then the next question I'd say, well, who are the competitors? If you're in a business of writing, let's say about SEO, I think we have Brian Beard. Is he on tonight? No, I don't see him. Who else writes about SEO? You know, who are the top 10? What do their books look like? What do the covers look like? How big are they? How many pages? What size are they? What are they charging? What's the price? What's in their descriptions that is different about what your description is? What's in their table of contents that you're covering that they don't? You really ought to do a good competitor analysis of what is out there in order to know that what you're offering is different. If Kathy and I are in the same field, and I'm saying, here's Kathy's book, you know, great book, I really and truly recommend it. But there's 3 things that she didn't bring up in her book that I think you really find fascinating in mine. And so I know my competition. It doesn't mean I can't, you know, pat them on the back for what they're doing. But if I wanted to say something that Dr. Oz doesn't say, or he doesn't go into the level that I go into, I have no problem saying that. We talked, I think it was on the show, talked about banners, being able to say, you know, these things, as Judith Briles, she's on, you know, Dr. Oz, Dr. whatever, they have these books. If you like these books, you'll love Randall Laughlin's books. You're using another authority with the books they have in a banner with the pictures of their books, saying, if you like these guys, you'll love what I do. And so we're taking a look at what really do our competitors have. If we don't know, then we're just spitting out the same thing. And if we're charging more than what they have in their book, does it really make sense? The other thing I tell my new authors is you got to have some level of accountability. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to, you know, I commit to this. Okay, at the end of whatever it is, 30 days from now, we're going to talk. Just talk. I said, you may not have anything done, but if you don't have some accountability, it'll be 6 months and nothing's done. And so I go back to them and I have a phone call and all that's like, just, hey, if you've done something, tell me about it. If you haven't, this is just a kind of a reminder. And I keep it very low key, non-judgmental, but those are the things that I think are really, really important. If you're trying to write on your own and it's just on your own and you don't have a process of doing it, then have somebody hold you just a little bit accountable. You know, we look at our education as writers. What do we really do? Do we read other writers? Do we read other books on writing? I think some of us do. Do we read articles on LinkedIn and other places? I think some of us do. There's a lot of them. I read books now with a different focus. I'm looking at how is the content presented, because that's really important to me, especially on technical subjects. But what's the sentence structure? I'm really gleaned in on the grammatic aspects of it. Why did they choose that particular adjective, or why are they using so many adverbs? Whatever it may happen to be, I'm really focused in on the actual words that are in there. And then I'm looking at discussions of things. So I think when we associate with others and collaborate, we're actually helping everybody become better. And it's one of those things, I don't think anybody wants to just be an okay writer. We don't spend all that time writing. We don't spend all that time editing. And we certainly spend all that time with marketing and doing everything else. But we really do need to be trying to improve ourselves and improve others. And that's kind of the journey that I made along the way to get from where I was basically in college a long time ago, having to write papers to answer whatever question it was, to doing things nowadays that I absolutely love doing, and I feel poorly. I walked the Camino de Santiago 4.5 years ago, and I'm sitting there handwriting stuff because I wanted to keep my writing done every single day, so I didn't miss a single day. And so I wrote about the Camino, little points. I figured I'd write a couple, 3 books about it, and I just haven't done it yet. I have a picture book about it, but I don't have the books on the business aspects or management thoughts about how the Camino and management work together hand in hand. But I have my notes on it and the structure that I want to talk about. So I think what we do, if you're a writer, you ought to be writing every day, not just posting blogs and things like that. I mean, actually writing. A journal is great. There are a lot of ways of doing it. But these things, if you're not enjoying it, maybe you're not writing on the topic you need to write on. If you're writing something now, what's the follow on? What's down the road? And then the issue is, what kind of commitment are you going to make? How accountable are you going to be to somebody else? I'm going to throw it open to any questions anybody has, but that's my kind of quick and dirty deal in 20 minutes or less.
Jeremy.
I'm raising my hand, Red.
Go right ahead, Jeremy.
I'm like, who's calling? Is Amy calling? Is Red calling?
Whoever.
First of all, I really want to acknowledge what the work that Percy is doing. I think that is incredible stuff. So I know that he just gave his intro, but that's a big deal, I think, for a lot of people and our society in general. Red, I have some questions about I think that process of your 40 questions is really cool. The 40 questions that my audience needs the answer to. Can you give me some sample questions of things that you would start with, like ideas around that? I know you're going to write a whole bunch, right? And then you're going to take your top 20, and these are the things that are going to be this really cool. Because you said it works really great with how-to, but I think it would work really great with tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah, there's a lot of different books that will work very, very well with.
Yeah.
Let's just stick with the SEO topic that I threw out there.
Okay.
It may be that you can write 200 words on SEO about website development and how the algorithms work. I was talking with another guy earlier today about this works great in 2021, but the algorithms are going to change. So if you structure your book so that the last 3 pages talk about how do you verify algorithms, how do you do this, then maybe your 2022 book is an upgrade to that one, or revision B or whatever they have to be, second edition. But if I'm looking at it, it may start out as really a 35 or 50 page ebook. What are the 25 things you need to know as a single business owner about starting a website? And you say, well, what's the first thing you need to know? How much money are you going to spend? Well, what money did I spend to have this one-page website, which is just a page that takes your information anyway. But look at what are the questions. If I'm talking about what I talked about here earlier, who is your audience? If it's baby boomers like mine, for most of the stuff that I write, well, one of the things I have to accommodate is 16 font, so that they don't have to worry about reading. So I take a look at my audience and try to incorporate that into the book. So if I'm looking at who are the top 10 authors in longevity, that's fairly easy to find. I can take a look at their covers. I can look at the similarity in their covers. I can look at how big the books are, what the prices are. So I look at each of those things. So if I'm looking at a question, I have to look at what information do I have that I can add value to somebody else's life. And if that value can be put in the term, well, that's that little snippet right there. How can I ask a question that I give this the answer? And I think if you can figure that, and this one leads to that one leads to this one, and within here, I have 2, 3, or 4 points, and then one little story that really sums it up very nicely. So you got to have the what's, a couple how-tos, maybe a why, and then a little story that gets some emotion. And I think if you can do that, there are a lot of books that can be done that way.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned competitive analysis. I think that's awesome. I like the points you made going through the competitive analysis, like what to look at in their stuff, how they're doing things with their table of contents, in the aspect of how is this, what I'm creating, different than, or fills gaps, or fixes things, or creates solutions from what the competition is. Yes, I love that. You mentioned something right before competitive analysis, and I missed it. What was that? And I don't, sorry, I know I'm making you go through your notes, but you hit that, and then you hit accountability. You talked about writing every day, but before competitive analysis, you mentioned something, and I forget what it is.
1 second here. Let me see if I can. Okay, I started out with what is the purpose of your book? You know, are you writing it just for your posterity so people know who you were, your great grandkids you may never see, have the real true story of Jeremy Jack?
Right.
If the purpose of your book is to make money, how are you going to do that? You have an email list? Do you have people who know how to market your book? I mean, what you really need to come to grips up front. What is the purpose of your book? So long as you're writing the book, it's staying in that same purpose. And that I think is really critical, because as you're writing your book, if you have 3 other people over here doing how-to books and yours is another how-to book, how are you different? Why would somebody want to listen to you over someone else? Right. And that's the thing that I want to capture, because a lot of people don't read all 10 authors. But if you're really and truly wanting to become a top 10 author, then you ought to know, what do these other people have that I don't have?
So yeah, that's a good point. Would you then recommend that to really not just be familiar with your competition? I'm familiar with my competition, but I have not read my competition inside and out. Mm-hmm. But would you recommend it? You need to know your competition that well, like read their material inside and out?
Well, I think it depends on what, as I say, you can usually look at the first 30 or so pages of a book on Amazon. So you don't have to. And if you have to buy the book, they generally can get a free ebook if you belong to Kindle Reader or whatever. So there are ways of getting that information. But if I take a look at, let's say, Dr. Oz's book on longevity, and I look at what he has down there, and he's not talking about this particular area very well, or at least it's not in that, then I know that's a ripe area for me to say, that's really where I want to concentrate some of my stuff. Or I take a look at what he has on human growth hormone, or telomeres, or on amino acids or something. What is out there right now that is not being talked about? And if I look up some of the stuff now and I see okay, here's the latest thing on 2008, but there's nothing really much on that between then and now, that becomes a ripe area for me to look at. So I mean, I do a lot more research than probably the average bear.
Sure. When you talked about writing every day, and sorry, James, I don't mean to take more time. I just have a quick question. And this is probably, anybody can answer this question, but Red, I'm curious what you say to your clients when it comes to, because you mentioned writing every day. How do you help them handle writer's block? And I'm talking about the mythical writer's block or the actual writer's. I don't know, what is your viewpoint about writer's block? I'm telling you this because I am in the writer's block, Red. I am right in it. Like, I can't even tell you how badly I'm in it.
Okay, three things. Number one, I've never ever been scared to speak in front of anybody, ever. So same thing happens with writer's block. I may have had it once or twice and not realized it, but I find
I've never had it, not like this.
But I realize that if I'm looking at something and I go in, okay, I look at health headlines today, and I'll look at 6 or 7 or 8 different sites, and I don't want that COVID crap. Let's find out what else is going on down here, and I start looking. Oh, that's kind of neat, and so I go into something there, and all of a sudden I start finding something, and oh, I didn't know that, or what has changed since I knew about it. To me, it's very, very easy because there's so much material out there that challenges my brain to say, hey, this is pretty neat. And then I just go. I find no problem. I use, maybe that's part of eliminating writer's block, is finding a topic that I have some level of passion in.
Of inspiration. I've been trying that too. That ain't help. I don't want to take James's question. Kathy, what you can definitely recommend?
I think sometimes what gets called writer's block is really writers need to regroup, to give it a break for a little bit.
I'm really feeling that.
Well, yeah, because you run out of fuel. I mean,
and I got shit to do, Kathy.
It's a lot of energy to keep cranking out stuff. And sometimes you just have to stop. I agree that it's good to write every day, but you don't have to write on the project every day.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting ready to say next. You can change horses in midstream. You could be writing about your particular thing, then you say, let me write about travel. Where have you been recently? Where would you want to go? I mean, there's a lot of topics out there depending on how once you write about what do I like about my favorite book, and just take a look at a couple pages and pick a couple things that, hey, I really like the way the character is, whatever. There's a lot of things you can do, but not in the same field you're in if that's where the block's at.
And you
Well,
write
Jeremy, I would
stuff,
like to just say
write
this.
letters to the editor. You don't have to send them. Just, just change gears, change gears.
Jeremy, I would just like to say this. Not all the time do you have to actually be putting words on paper. You could be writing in your head.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah,
working out
and I'm
the
definitely
story.
still in that process for sure. It's just putting it on paper is where I'm like,
that's still
maybe it's
writing.
still happening in here right now.
Yeah, that's still writing, because a lot of time I don't write every day because I want to formulate the story, and therefore I just
And I'm
I get to
definitely a
point in
guy who
that
does that in
story.
general.
Yeah, I get to a point in the story where I say, all right, I'm just going to think about it for a while on how I want to go, because I'm a planner. And
right,
my question
same.
to Red was like, when you were talking about things, you were talking mainly about nonfiction, but your 20 questions, your idea about finding your audience, that all goes to the same for people who write novels too. In fact,
sure
you can
does.
use the 20 questions to plot out your book.
I
So
bet
you
you
have
can.
your
I've
20
never.
questions and you work out how your story is going to go from those. Because when you
From a
write a
storyboard
book,
perspective, you're absolutely right. There has to be a plan to get there.
right.
And
And
each
so-
question may be a chapter, and the bullets are the sub chapters within that. I mean, if I were doing a novel fiction, that's exactly what I would be doing, because I would want to know what is happening at the same time so that they can interweave and not lose traction with the characters and the plot. That's exactly what I'd be doing, because that's what I see in other books that I'm reading. Why are we here? I'm asking myself that why question. In some cases, it becomes obvious a chapter down the road because I needed to know that information. But sometimes they could have left the whole thing out. There's some authors that when they're writing on this part of their stuff, I cannot put the book down, and then all of a sudden they go over here, and I'm drudging through. It's just that they have the ability to keep you here, but then they have the ability to keep you down here too. And I guess if I really enjoyed this other area down here, I would equate it, but. But anything that's a true story that you can weave into what you're doing, and I write my stuff every day. I think the one I'm writing right now is on human growth hormone and longevity. And I put in there the stuff that I do, my 72-hour fast every month, those kinds of things that, what do I do that I'm showing that I'm aligned with what I'm saying. And so if I have these little stories that can go with that, and maybe your character in a book happens to have a story that you lived, because that's part of being able to put that emotional into that person is what's going on, what they see, what they feel. Those things are there. But if you're just writing a how-to and there's no personal touch, you're not touching any emotion, people get lost in a hurry. They lose interest. But I try to weave in, like my wife's story, other ones like that I've had. If I'm talking about bone density, that's a really good topic. I can weave in stories that I know about myself, of things that have happened, or a particular diet or something that I've experienced. So I try to include my own personal stuff in there so people see that I've lived through this thing before. That's part of the reason why I can write about it as well as, at least as passionately as I do.
I love it. You bring like that personal connection to it, which I love. I do have a question for you. So I know that you have written every single day, which I admire, because I wish that I could do that. I mean, it was hard enough to keep up my blog. I think I made 3 blog posts and that was like, it. But the question I have is, have you noticed any benefit to writing every day? Because I know that you post your blogs and everything like that on Facebook. Have you noticed that it kind of makes you stand apart? I mean, it clearly shows that you're an expert in the field that you write in, health and wellness and longevity, but have you noticed any other like benefits, like it's driven more traction to your books or to your business or anything like that by writing every day and being consistent like that?
It's like Sandy said, you'll be an overnight sensation in 10 or 20 years. It's one of those things. If I looked at my writing 2 years ago, that wasn't as consistent as now, and I look at the number of views, there may be one or two or maybe none. And I'm looking at over a period of a month, I might have a half a dozen or maybe more. It just wasn't there. Then all of a sudden, depending on what my topic is, all of a sudden I have 10 views average, not 20 average, not 30 average. And to me, I figure, 25 is a low day nowadays. I've had as many as 600, depending on what my story was for the day. So it sort of depends. My military stories, when I write about them, I've done a little over half a dozen. Well, I get hundreds of views on those because I touch a nerve that everybody else has shared something similar to, or they'll say, bullshit, that didn't happen. And I'll say, yes, it did. And I'll say, why? Because it's something that people connect with. But again, it's an emotional story of what went on. But if I'm talking about COVID, no, I don't get a whole lot unless it's something really dire today that people need to know. If I'm writing about insulin and sugar and something like that, maybe there's not a lot of people that want to know that. But I'm gradually seeing that over time, I've gone from a level up and I've maintained a higher level of views. That's only one. I'm seeing shares of that within LinkedIn a lot, within Facebook occasionally. But I am getting shares. So I'm getting other people's viewers to see things. I am getting people that write, like today I had one, I posted a copy of my book and one of the guys that I know said, what's the link? I said, okay, here's the link. He said, I bought one. And I said, thank you very much.
No, I love that.
And so, yes, I don't plug my books on Facebook or LinkedIn. I don't think I've ever done it on LinkedIn. I just don't do it. It's not one of those things, but I know you can do it periodically. Today, I just happened to say, hey, here's the first book I ever wrote.
Yeah.
And I threw it up there and the guy said, where's the link? Well, I didn't do it on purpose, but when he asked the question, I had to answer it. And then he said, well, I bought your physical book, your soft hat, anyway, paperback. And that's kind of nice. But yeah, I am seeing that. I am seeing people connecting with me from LinkedIn a lot more than 6 months ago. I'm seeing that. And some of the people who are actually commenting or liking the particular article. So I am seeing traction, yes.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. This, being consistent and tying it to where it's relatable so people can share in the experience or they've experienced the same thing and they feel like someone else understands it. I think you can do the same thing, James, with fiction. When I was thinking about your killer series and stuff, you can write little short blog posts about, kind of developing characters more in depth. So then they have like a background story, kind of posting things like that to help draw attention and then it'll be more consistent. This is just for any fiction, but your killer series was on my mind. And it's just, I think it, doing kind of like what Red's doing and, posting consistently, even if it's 500 words or less, and just kind of doing it is going to keep you in the forefront of people's minds. And it's going to kind of keep, here comes my daughter screaming, I'm sorry. It'll keep, things kind of, I guess, the relationship that you have with your readers and your fans, and it'll make them more dedicated to buying and asking, oh, well, what other books have you written? And asking you for it. And then you can kind of give them the link. And so that's where being consistent and stuff is great. I think, Percy, for you and your nonprofit, I think it would be kind of perfect to kind of keep it out there and in the forefront, and that this book correlates with it and everything like that. I think this all, Red's like the prime candidate on being, consistent and doing it every day, so I think this is great.
Here's some research I did in Cuba about 15 months ago. I was down there visiting my sister, probably about 3 inches or so. This is all on heart health. Latest stuff as of that particular end of 2019. End of 2019, November, December 2019. And distractions get in the way. I have that stuff there. There's literally probably at least one book, maybe two, but I have the information. It's just a matter, and I have it all written down. That's just the stuff I printed out on the computer. So I have the articles, I have everything, but sometimes we just don't get to it. It's not necessarily like writer's block. I call it author's block. I have too many books to write. And so right now I'm writing 2 books for publishers. If I'm going to have how do I know when a client's ready for my service in publishing? Well, if they have a finished manuscript, they're ready. If they don't, then they're not ready. But I want to be able to give them something that says, hey, here's something you need to consider. And I go into these things we talked about earlier about audience and top 10 and umpty. And I talk about those things and say, here are things you need to be thinking about, even if they're not ready right now for your book. But what it does is it shows a level of authority within that field, because now I've written a book on publishing for my clients that I can give away. But it also helps them when it comes back. Well, are they going to hire me as a publisher? I don't know. But at least I have a foot in the door because I've given them some information. And I also talk in there about how I do my own publishing. So that's part of that equation. But if I also write another book that says, what are the 25 questions that new authors must have answered before putting pen to paper or finger to keypad? Those things I think are some of those things, competitor analysis, the audience and things. So those are things I think that'll fall in nicely that also help establish you as an authority in your particular area of wherever you write. I know that James is a publisher, Julie's a publisher. I don't see anybody else I recognize as a publisher, but maybe those are things that may not be right now, but one of those things that you may want to think about doing in the future. When you take a look at your books, my biggest problem last year was covers. They would hire somebody on Fiverr.com and we'd spend weeks, literally weeks, trying to get the cover physically the right size. Everything was done, everything's in there except for the cover. And so that was my biggest bugaboo. Then when you're getting a cover, it's got to be the right size. So don't just hire somebody because they get pretty covers. Hire somebody who's done a lot of books in that particular area that they know exactly what they're looking for.
Nice. That's great advice. So Red, can you take just a couple minutes? I know the majority of us know about the Nonfiction Authors Association, but can you tell us a brief summary about it, what you guys have coming on this year, what days you guys meet and like what time and everything, and just give us like a quick little summary about it.
Pre-COVID, Kathy, was it the third Wednesday or third Thursday of the month?
I'm pretty sure it was Thursdays, but I'm not sure.
I want to say that too. I'm looking at my calendar now, and we used to meet physically, and a bad night was 12 people. A good night was 24 people. And at 24, we almost could not put everybody in the back room where everything was at. And we would have people come in, they'd spend a couple of minutes, they'd say, Kathy, tell us, what's going on in her life, her book, just, basic 30-second elevator pitch done in about 2.5 minutes. That would kind of let everybody know where she was. But it was a place where we could meet an hour or so earlier, have dinner, and talk about how are we having, what problems are you having. Sandy would always be there at least an hour early to be able to talk about marketing or this or that or whatever. But so we're an organization specializing in nonfiction, and we are a local group of people. And when I talk about having a couple dozen people, there's one guy came up from League City, another guy comes down from Spring or some other. And for where we're meeting at, that was a big deal trying to get there at rush hour traffic time. I'm down in the Sugar Land area. I have to leave about 2 hours before the meeting. Otherwise, I'm enjoying the traffic, getting to the meeting and worrying about being late. But we have presentations. Mike Coas does one. He's had a phenomenal year in book sales. He talks about what he's done. We may have somebody talking about an audiobook, another person talking, but just the same way that Sandy has her programs down here, but they're more oriented toward the people in the room of what is working and what is not working. And you have a chance to go one-on-one or two-on-one with a person at the end of that meeting saying, what has done? Now, Kathy has done at least 2 presentations that I know of on doing articles for magazines and journals and things like that. And I think there was another one you did too, or did you do both of them on the same topic?
I think I did 2 on that topic, but some distance apart.
But we have people that come in and they'll talk about the aspects of actually writing the book or publishing the book or marketing the book or improving your sales. But it's a local group of authors who are available, who that you can collaborate on the phone and say, hey, you talked about this last night or 2 weeks ago. I really need more information on how you, and that's kind of what we are. We're kind of a small group in collaboration. When COVID hit, things just kind of went awry for a while. We caught back up. I did some individual, I think Kathy and Julie, and I don't see anybody else here online. I did Sandy. We talked about you before you were an author. What was your life like? And then once you wrote your first book, how did you get that book concept? What happened? And I think I'm going to continue that same thing this year with the individual author presentations, except their videos. But I'm also going to have, we used to have a presentation done. I haven't done that in a while. The last 2 meetings we've had, I think I was too late to announce them. We really didn't have a big presentation, big group of people. But I'd like to have that same kind of generality where, okay, Kathy, a couple of minutes there, James, a couple of minutes, Athena, a couple of minutes, Jeremy. Where have you been in the last month? What's going on now? How is your book progressing? So people kind of keep up with things that are going on. That I think is important because we're local and we can talk to everyone. And then if I want to have somebody come in, I thought one of the best things I ever had done at the Houston Independent Authors, I went and talked on literary writing. I'm pretty sure it's literary. And I'm thinking, what does that have to do with nonfiction? And she got up there and she met her, and I'm thinking to myself, wow. So I think there's fields that we don't even think about that have application to what we're doing. And that's part of my job, is to kind of find some of those fields. But I try to get speakers who can add value to you as a novice author who is working on your first book, or you've already written 3 or 4, and maybe there's some aspect of post-authorism that makes sense that maybe you haven't tried yet. You know, we're talking now podcasts and things that we really didn't even think about before. You know, everybody nowadays, we've been doing video Zooms for a long time, but for authors, we're really not out there doing our thing. I belong to a group called Happy Neighborhood Project, and every Friday it's worldwide, and we have at least 175 people on Zoom. They're trying to get to be 100 meetings per week, and they're all over the United States. So if you're in a business such as publishing, that you can give a 2-minute little summary of what you do, why not be in a networking group that you can talk to other people and say, hey, this is what I do. And if they know people who have a need for that, that's really where you start connecting to get more business. So how do we as authors put ourselves out there for our own personal businesses, but also get people to know who we are? And that's part of networking. And that's part of what NFAA does. And NFAA does.
Nice. I love it.
Networking for authors.
Yeah. So you guys are meeting virtually now, right?
Yes.
I was going to say, I see it on mine and Sandy's calendar that you guys meet. It's the 3rd Thursday of every month.
It used to be the 3rd Thursday of every month, and I'm pretty sure it's going to stay the 3rd Thursday of every month. I just need to get the schedule out with who's going to present and tell everybody a week in advance, 4 days in advance, 2 days in advance, so we have people show up.
Yeah, I think if you can post the link to join the organization in the private group, and then, you know, post who's all speaking and stuff like that, I think it'd be great. I think your organization could help a lot of people.
One thing real quick, Amy, one of the byproducts of this Happy Neighborhood Project thing is that they get a discount on Zoom Enterprise.
Nice.
Zoom Enterprise is $250 a month. They'll give it to you for $25 a month.
Oh, nice.
So if that might be, I don't know what you all are using. And I don't know really what Zoom Enterprise does beyond the $12 one that most people get but I am seriously considering the $25 a month, because I envision myself going off in some other different directions here very, very shortly, that I'm probably going to need something like that. So if other people are in an area that you're using Zoom and that you think it might help you, give me a buzz. I'll tell you when the next meetings are and get you there. But one of the things of being a member of this particular networking group is you can, in fact, get a super big discount on that particular Zoom product.
I don't know what level it is, but I have a paid subscription to Zoom because I didn't want to be limited to 40-minute segments for meetings. And when I did my book launch, I paid for a 1-month subscription to Zoom Webinar, which meant that people only saw what we were presenting on the screen. We didn't have what I call the Brady Bunch appearance like we have tonight. And I think I paid $40, and it did not automatically renew. If I wanted to keep doing it, I had to click a different button, and I didn't do that. I just needed it for that 1 month.
Yeah, I think last Friday we had 30 breakout sessions. And they had two different breakout sessions. So you have 4 or 5 or 6 people giving a 2-minute presentation over 20 minutes, and then you have a chance to network and gab back and forth. And so kind of, you have 2 20-minute sessions, and I think it's kind of neat because I'm talking to people, from Taiwan to Wales, and in between, Canada, and it's a lot of people And when I give my little 30-second spiel and then a minute and a half of clarity of what I really do, and then I add in some personal stuff, I get, at least once a time, say, I got somebody that you really need to talk to. I don't go a week without having that kind of comment being made.
No, that's wonderful.
So Red, actually, I think Red and I were talking one day and I said, why don't we try a Zoom for the Houston nonfiction authors? And he fixed a date and then something happened, I forget what, and I didn't join, but I watched the Zoom later and it was Red and Hyatt. And he was talking about his book, what's it called? It's got a funny name.
88,
That ain't right.
No. His
88
book,
Secrets to Be
no, I'm sorry. It wasn't Hyatt. It was the guy.
Vietnam guy?
Yeah.
Raul.
Raul.
Oh,
He was
yeah.
talking about the name of his book. Anyway, it was very interesting to me to hear it later, but I haven't heard about it. That was like in October, November. I haven't heard about any Zoom meetings since then. So I don't know if I've fallen off the list or what's going on or.
I don't have an email list of the people in the Houston area. For whatever reason, National doesn't feel comfortable giving us that information. So I have to put that out via Facebook. And it's one of those things, if you're not looking or you don't go there to check, it's like the latest algorithm on Facebook is saying they've taken all groups and basically taken it from all posts down to highlights. Unless you go in there and manually change it for your group, you're going to get only highlights, which means you're not going to get everything you used to see. So I've gone in and I changed about 20 or 25 of my groups back to all posts. Now I'm seeing stuff I hadn't seen in a while because I'm seeing posts from that particular group. And so if you're not seeing something because Facebook, that's what I'm saying, I need to hit it 10 days in advance, 5 days in advance. I need to do it morning and evening where you're probably within that cycle of trying to catch it. I wish I did have an email list for everybody so I could send something out and say, hey, here's what's going on.
So can I give you mine on the chat line and you put
Absolutely. I think I probably have yours anyway.
So when is it? You should, because we emailed all about those videos back and forth.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have yours.
So when is the next meeting? Zoom meeting?
Well, it looks like it's going to be the 21st of this month.
21st of January. At 7?
At probably, yeah, hang on one second. I got to check one thing real quick. The 21st. I don't want to. 7 o'clock on the 21st.
Okay.
And typically we used to charge a little bit of an admission fee, and there is a charge for people coming in, but I try to keep everybody, if you show up, it's free. So if you want to go, I'll let Amy go ahead and post it. If you just want to sit in and see what it's like, you may not be a local Houston author, but that doesn't mean you can't contribute to whatever you think is going on.
And it is your intention to keep it the third Thursday at 7 p.m. So I could pencil that in at my.
That is my intention. I want to put a schedule out for the year saying, here's who's speaking, here's our topic du jour, whatever it may happen to be. So that's my big deal this week.
Okay, well, the thing is, I think many of the regular people, as you said, Mike Cowless, me, Hyatt, Raul.
I have at least a half a dozen to a dozen that I can tap on and let them know this. But it's the other people who show up once every 3 or 4 months because they happen to be free that night or whatever they happen to be.
Okay.
But if somebody here has done an audiobook and they want to talk to the Nonfiction Authors Association about an audiobook,
I've done an audiobook, but I hardly consider myself an expert at it. I've done the process and I can describe the process and I can.
Those are things I think are important for people. I mean, I think Raul will probably want to have an audiobook because he wants a movie.
Skunk Alpha, that's his book.
Right, yeah, thank you.
But I know
was trying to think of that. It wasn't coming.
But
I've always wondered, how did that come about? Skunk Alpha, where did that come from? And so he explained when that one evening where he was just him and Red talking about more of his experience in Vietnam and how the name came about.
You got to
So,
enjoy it on the water. I got to enjoy it in the air. Whole lot different experience.
Nice. So does anyone have any other questions for Red or comments or anything that they want to share that's going on for them?
well, I'll add one more thing. I joined first the National Nonfiction Authors Association. And if you do that, then you're going to the weekly meetings. Back when they were in person, were supposed to be free. So I mean, that you get that benefit of going to the local chapter for free. But they put out tons of information. Stephanie Chandler, I think her name is. It's so much, it's overwhelming. I can't keep up with it. It's too much to
I
read.
get emails from her all the time. Yeah.
It's just too much to read. But if you can't say they don't provide something for your money. They provide a lot from the national organization. And then there's a local chapter. And for me personally, I mean, that really was how I started networking in Houston, was meeting Red, meeting Hyatt, meeting Sandy, meeting the people of that group. So they're a really good foundational group if you're in Houston. And for those of you who are not in Houston, there might be a chapter near you that you could also consider trying to network with.
Awesome. I love it.
Percy, where are you? Did you tell us where you are? Percy?
He's in Spring.
Spring, yeah, you could, I mean, the meetings I used to hate to drive to because they're way up north, but you're probably closer to where the old meeting place is. I mean, I know you are than I am.
Yeah, Spring, North Houston area.
Amy, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Percy, fantastic opening. Really and truly enjoyed that. Continue with that. That's very, very worthwhile. I'll pat you on the back for that one.
Thank you.
Percy, do you know of an organization called Bridges to Life?
I am familiar with it. I think it's a transitional program helping back
It's a
in.
small group in prison program. They have to be recommended by a chaplain or somebody in the staff. I think it's a 14-week program. A very good friend of my husband's is one of the leaders of the small groups. I think it's 14 weeks, and they have to commit that they will come to every session unless, well, I don't know how it works with COVID, but before COVID, they had to commit to come to every session unless they were in lockdown and not allowed to. And it's just a small group way to process, how did I end up here? Where do I want to go from here? Part of what they have to do is write a letter of acknowledgement to people that they may have hurt. They are not required to deliver it. In fact, they're discouraged to, at least not immediately, but they are asked to write it and share it with the group. They have a chance to tell their biography of what they've been through and how they got here. It's very, very powerful. It was started by a Catholic person. That the point, being Catholic is not the point of the story, but that it was his faith that motivated him to do this. His sister was brutally murdered in a break-in robbery that went horribly wrong. And he grieved about it for a long time. And then he decided, I need to do something useful about all this anger. And so he started this program. I'm probably not explaining this very well. If you're interested, Percy, put your contact information in the chat for me.
We'll do
and
it.
I'll get the link and send it to you. It's a wonderful program. And the rate of returns back to jail for people who have gone through this program is extremely low. It's been very effective. It started here in Houston. It's now pretty common throughout Texas and is starting to spread to other places. At first, the prison officials did not want them in because they just didn't want people in the building. But when they've seen the impact that it has had on the people who participated in it, now they're begging them to please expand the program. So give me your email address and I'll get you some information about it.
We'll do it. Thank you.
Here, Percy, you sent that directly to me, so make sure to send it to Kathy.
Yeah.
Amy just wrote, well, before we get off, I think this would be a cool subject. Red mentioned LinkedIn in his little conversation there. I don't think we've ever had somebody in the group who's a LinkedIn expert. And the reason I'm asking is because I am not, I never use LinkedIn. And I think somebody who's really good with LinkedIn and somebody who uses it all the time and is just savvy and knows all the ways that it can benefit us would be great to hear from, because I don't know SH about it.
Yeah.
Awesome. I will be on the lookout and start looking for some people.
Okay,
to
so Amy, between now and 30 days from now, our next time we go in November, come up with 20 to 40 questions on your first book. Accountability. Think about
Sure.
it.
I
Think
will
about
think about it. I'll think about it. And all my free time, you guys, I will think.
Percy, welcome to the group.
You live for nap time.
Welcome to Sandy's retirement.
And as James said earlier, sometimes the writing is in the mind. Well, you
That's
gotta
right.
pick
that's
up the
true.
phone and pick up the phone and record it.
That is so true. There's really no excuse now because I can record it, except I would have background noise. But you know, hey, it's all part of
Background noises
life.
help. Background noises help. It fills in the little gaps.
You have a lot to write about when you get a chance to do so.
Yeah, I love it. You guys are so determined on me to write this book. I love it. Y'all keep motivating me. Keep motivating me. But Red, thank you so much for tonight. It was awesome. As usual, I expected nothing less. Percy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I will see everyone on Friday for our mastermind. So make sure you check your emails for the topic that we'll be talking about. But everyone have a fantastic rest of the night and a great week. And I'll see you guys on Friday. Bye, everyone.
Bye.